Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest running hiking podcast, downloaded over 500,000 times in over 145 countries and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. I'm your host, Tim Savage, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jill Savage.
Hello everyone, it's great to be here for what's looking like a terrific hiking 2021.
In today's episode 174, we are taking you through our on-trail episode of the Schlink Hut walking track in Kosciuszko National Park. Now, before we get into today's episode, if you would like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways you can help us out. Firstly, subscribe on your podcast host of choice so it's available as soon as it's published, and if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us, if you like what we do, is to go through the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. Over the past 4 years, we have brought you on-trail recordings of some of our shorter, more complex hikes, and in particular of our longer trails. We realise that not all of you are into long-distance hiking or hiking on technical trails, so we've decided that we're going to bring you some longer day hikes and overnight hikes suitable for just about any hiker, and we'll be releasing these on a regular basis. The first of these episodes was recorded on the Schlink Hut walking track in Kosciuszko National Park just after Christmas 2020. This is a great walk that can be broken down into smaller hikes so you can pretty much choose your own adventure, and it provides a good opportunity for both newer and experienced hikers. To get the best from this podcast, open up the Schlink Hut walking trail review on our website to see the images as well as the full details as you go to help you with this walk. We hope you enjoy. Good morning. It's just on 11 o'clock on Monday the 28th of December. It's actually a Boxing Day holiday, and we're up here in Kosciuszko National Park, and we're going to be doing the Schlink Hut walk, which is a 22-kilometre walk return. So 11 kilometres in, 11 kilometres out, and includes 3 huts. We've already done another 6-kilometre walk this morning, and we figured that 11 kilometres for the rest of the day shouldn't be too bad, although it is a steep uphill section to start with. So we figured 3 to 4 hours should get us in there with a lunch break.
Yeah, it's another beautiful day. Earlier this morning, actually not long ago, probably about 20 kilometres down the road, we were covered in a thick layer of mist, and we've popped up out of that, and blue skies, and it's actually quite warm, I think, for the morning, and no doubt going to get hotter as we do that big steep climb.
One thing that has been interesting, given that it is, it's just after Christmas, there has been snow up in the Alps over the last 4 or 5 days, and it did settle on the ground in some areas, but I think most of it's pretty much gone now. So, while it's not hot today, it's certainly too hot for snow to linger around too long. Okay, we better get started, and we've got a steep ascent up a gravel road to start with. Talk to you later. Okay, we're just sitting on the side of the road having lunch. We normally try and have lunch sometime between about 12 and 12:30. And normally around about 12 o'clock we start looking for somewhere decent to sit. In this case here, we're sitting on the side of the road on a raised grassed verge. Grass is a bit long, but we're in the shade, so it's actually not a bad spot. The wind is actually quite strong at the moment, and I've been having to wait for a few minutes to try and get a bit of a lull in the blowiness to actually do the recording, but you may actually hear some wind blowing in the background.
Yeah, so we've done about just over 4Ks, and we've just passed the turn off to the first hut, and up to this point it's been pretty steep zigzag uphill. We're starting to get a bit more undulating, long undulations, but still a little bit more up and down, and a bit more shade. So that's sort of making the walking a little bit easier, with some, tough spots interspersed with shady spots.
Okay, we'll have a few more minutes rest and then we'll head off to our next destination. There are 3 huts on this walk. We bypassed the first hut. We may look at doing that on the way back because you actually have to turn off the main track to go through and do that. We'll continue along on this road until we head to our destination tonight, which is Schlink hut. Talk to you later. We've been walking for roughly around about 20 minutes, and we've just come to the turn off to Horse Camp Hut, which is the first of 3 huts on this trail. The turn off takes you about 400 metres into the hut itself, and it's one of the nicer alpine huts I've seen. Outside is pretty typical. It's wrought iron. It's in reasonably good condition. It's got a unique sort of fireplace, almost a backwards triangular fireplace.
A great red door.
Great red door with a horseshoe. But inside, it's really quite nice. Sometimes you get huts that look like they've been abandoned for years, and other times, you could almost say this is almost livable from a full-time point of view. And this is one of these sort of huts. Separate bedroom, fairly small, with a small little area to put your packs. Then there's the lounge, dining room, kitchen, I suppose, where the fire is, which you could probably sleep a few more people on the floor in there as well if need be. Good hut. There is a tank of water, a 44-gallon drum of water at the back of the hut with a sticker on it saying do not drink. That's pretty typical with a lot of these alpine huts. I think the park service would prefer that you don't drink it, but if you have no choice, as long as you have a filter, I think you'd be fine. And I think it's just the park service covering themselves in case you drink water and you end up getting sick. The area outside the hut, nice little grassy area that's mown and maintained. There's a fire pit with some logs for sitting in during the warmer months of the year. And it's surrounded by bushland and forest. So great little hut.
Yeah, it's a really nice little spot, and I liked the dunny. It's got a split door, so I think you'll be able to watch the view while you're doing your business. So I think that's kind of a nice innovation on some of these huts, though you'd have to be pretty friendly, I guess, with the people who were staying there. And you can't actually stay inside the huts, though.
No, all the huts in the Alpine area are meant for emergency only. So the intent is not that you plan on sleeping inside the huts. You take your tent, and if the weather turns really nasty and it's going to cause a safety issue from your health, then you sleep inside the huts.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if people start planning on staying in the huts all the time, they're just going to get worn down too quickly.
Yeah, and there was plenty of space outside and nice spots that you could pitch your tent as well. So, quite a nice campsite.
Okay, it's just almost 2 o'clock, and we've done just a bit over 7 kilometres. So we just decided to have a bit of a break on the side of the road. Probably in around about another 800, 900 metres, we should come across the second hut. And then we've got roughly around about 3 and a bit kilometres to go to Schlink's hut, which is our destination for tonight. Given that it's just on 2 o'clock, sunset is tonight?
8:40.
8:40, so we've got plenty of daylight hours left. We were actually expecting some rain today. Not
Fingers
a lot,
crossed.
not a lot, but there was forecast being a reasonably high chance of rain, so far so good. But it's been a bit windy today on and off, and even though
That's an understatement.
Yeah, and I think the first section of the walk was certainly the steepest. This section, since we had lunch, is pretty much been undulating, so we'll see what happens with this last section that takes us into Schlink's hut. Okay, talk to you later. It's just on 3 o'clock and we're inside White's River Hut, just doing this recording. We got here about 5-10 minutes ago and taken some photos and used the toilet facilities. And it was starting to spit, so we thought we'd do the recording inside and grab our rain gear out if need be. We've got about 3 kilometres left to go to Schlink's hut. I'll get the pronunciation right one of these days. I wasn't too sure where White's River hut was because about 15 minutes or 20 minutes ago, I saw another small hut down off the side of the road, probably about 200 metres down the hill. So because it was a steep access way, I dropped my pack off and walked down. And it was actually a hut for use for the snowy hydro scheme. So it was obviously a working hut. And I must admit it didn't have White's River written on there, but I thought I'll have a look anyway because it seemed to be about the right sort of distance. White's River hut itself is very obvious from the road, so there's no mistaking what it is. It's pretty much at road level, so you don't have to go up or down too much. You're crossing over a couple of streams and rivers. One of them's got quite a large mesh bridge, which is pretty much bent. So I think, after a period of heavy rain or an early spring, you're likely to end up getting wet feet on it. The other smaller one just needed to go through and just do some rock hopping to get across it. It wasn't particularly big. Similar sort of hut, the corrugated iron, toilet out the back with the 2 panel doors so you can have the top or, for that matter, the bottom open, get a bit of a view. Inside the hut, not as flash as the horse camp hut, but still reasonably well looked after. Bunks, so you could sleep comfortably, 4 people in here plus people on the floor. There is a potbelly stove inside the fireplace, and there's almost a veranda which is covered in, which is a wood store, and all the packs can go out there as well.
Yeah, I think this one's not quite as well kept, particularly on the outside. The grass is a bit longer, and it's a bit more of a challenge to find a good campsite for your tent. But still, it's got everything that you need, and it's probably close enough to the end of the hike that you'd probably continue on. But maybe if you wanted to explore around. What's interesting is there's a sign up that says that this is you're just leaving a phytophthora area and you need to scrub your boots if you're going up into the hillside beyond. So some of those things need to be mindful of, but it's pretty good.
I think, if you're super fit, you'd probably make do to go through to Schlink's hut in one day and do a one-day return, making a 22-kilometre walk. But for most people, though, that's more than they want to do. This one here, if you're doing a return trip on this one, is probably about 16 or 17 kilometres. Again, for some people, it might be a bit too much, but it's probably doable as a day hike.
As a day hike, you're not carrying the weight and the pack and the tent and the food.
No.
So it's a little bit easier going, but still, it's a bit of a challenge.
Okay, on to our destination hut. Good evening. It's 7:20. We're here at Schlink hut, which is the destination for our walk today. All up, this walk should have been around about 11 kilometres. But because we did all the side trips to the other huts, that's taken us through to roughly around about 12.5 to 13 kilometres. So it's given us a couple of extra kilometres we hadn't actually planned on doing. But well worth the effort. This walk, I expected a fair amount of it to be on management trail, and pretty much the entire work.
The whole lot.
The whole lot is on management trail. So it's relatively easy to follow. There's a hard bit at the start of the walk that I thought we'd gone the wrong way, but that was more from me not trusting my own abilities, and we had gone the correct way, but sometimes you think, oh, we should have come across something by now. Lots of flowering bushes and wildflowers out at the moment. I mean, we are past Christmas now, but there's just lots of little stuff, smaller stuff typically, that you're walking past that you just find, and even though it's not big and obvious, it's still really attractive and really worthwhile looking at.
Yeah, it's been an interesting hike from that perspective, and you did need to sort of keep your eye to the ground a little bit. Most of it is uphill, as you'd probably imagine. You're in the alpine regions, and you're going to the huts, so you're going up to the huts. Relatively easy underfoot on the management trail. It's just long uphill stretches. So, and as Tim said, that we'd done a few extra kilometres that we hadn't anticipated in doing.
We started this walk around about 22:12, and we got here at around about just after 4. So, 4.5 hours, and that's including the additional distance we did, was not unrealistic. We weren't moving at a rapid pace, but I took a lot of photos today, which is, I always do take photos, but probably not as many as I expected that I was going to take today.
Yeah, Tim was always trailing behind, having stopped to take a photo, and I kept walking and then turned around and thought, oh, where is he?
The hut itself, it's actually a bigger hut than I thought it was going to be. It's actually quite large. Haven't had a chance to look inside yet. We'll do that tomorrow, because when we got here, it was sort of threatening to rain, and we wanted to get the tent up and get organised. So by the time we got the tent sorted out, got everything into the tent, got sorted out for the evening, we thought, okay, look, we'll have dinner and we'll then wait till tomorrow to see what the inside looks like. This hut has also got a toilet like the other ones. No toilet paper, which is not unusual. But
this one's a little bit more upmarket.
Yeah, so we always tend to bring toilet paper and assume nothing's going to be there, even though toilets are provided, and that's a safer thing to do. And toilet paper really doesn't weigh that much. There's probably around about 10 tents up around the hut. I think there might be people staying inside. Now, again, really staying inside the hut is supposed to be for emergencies only. And I could be wrong. I haven't been in there yet, but I just get the impression people are staying in there. But there's a lot of tents, as I said, 10 tents, and there's people that are in tents by themselves, in couples. So I think there's roughly around about 10 people staying here, which is, there's 300 people allowed in this section of the park, and around about 10 people in this area. And while this is considered wilderness camping, it's not a formal campground. Given we still have COVID going on at the moment, we do need to fill out a trip intention form, just so if something does happen or a hotspot occurs at this hut, they know everybody who stayed here. And that's pretty much the same for all of New South Wales. Even if it's not staying in a designated campground, if you are in a designated campground, you do need to book, even if you don't have to pay. If you're wilderness camping in New South Wales on government land, you do need to fill out a trip intention form. Haven't really talked to anyone else here. We sort of said hello to people as we passed them or they passed us today, and typically it was people passing us because we were taking so many photos. But the thing that interests me with this location is usually New South Wales parks like you not to camp hard up against the huts. They like having a bit of distance. But really with this location, unless you start bush bashing and moving further into the wild bush and damaging that, you have no choice but to camp relatively close up towards the hut. There's a few people that have camped hard up against the hut, because there has been a lot of wind today, and that's giving a bit of shelter. The other issue is flat ground, and that's a hard thing here. Most of the sites are sloping. Trying to find a tent site that's dead flat is difficult at this location. And I think if you want to do that, you've got to get here probably around about lunchtime, not sort of mid to late afternoon.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. And, I mean, it's okay. We'll probably have a rush of blood to our toes by the time we get to the morning. But, I think all up, it seems to be a good spot. Everybody seems to have settled down for the night now. So there were lots of good nights being shared a few minutes ago. So, it's pretty quiet, and even though there are a few people about.
Okay, that's all for us. Time to go to bed. Night. Good morning. It's day 2 of our Schlink track walk. It's either 10 to 7 or 5 past 7, depends on whose watch you're talking about. For some reason, our watches are reading differently, so don't know why that is. Good sleep last night. As far as is possible from my perspective, I'm one of these hikers that I don't have long sleeps when I hike. I tend to have short sleep, then wake up, short sleep, then wake up. And given that we went to bed last night, not long after 7 o'clock, it's a long night. Temperature-wise, it did get down to 0 or worse last night, because when we got up, we had some of the gear we'd left outside had ice on it. So we had expected to have cold weather. And it's really funny when you're up in the Australian Alps. It's the middle of summer. You're potentially getting 30 degrees on some days, and then on other days you're getting ice or frost at night time.
Yeah, that did surprise me. I think we're testing out a new tent. I was quite warm, but then I realised that I had my pack along the side of the tent and was covered in ice, so on the outside of the tent, so that meant it was protecting me somewhat. But quite a nice night. The wind died down. It was reasonably calm. I did wonder at one point why there weren't many animals wandering around, but then realised it was probably too cold for them too.
Yeah, and that has been the interesting thing so far this walk. We haven't seen any animal life on this walk. We did on the one previously.
I've seen some wallabies hopping around, and
and there has certainly been a lot of crows, which is pretty typical in the Alps. This area of the Alps is quite interesting. It's not something I'm commonly used to. I find that every area is different as far as the vegetation. And in this case here, a lot of the mallees, which you tend to get just before the tree line disappears, a lot of the undergrowth, and I'm sitting here looking at the hill behind the hut, and there's this cemetery, I suppose is the best way to describe it, of tree skeletons. And on this hill there's not a lot of new trees, but I believe that the trees that are in this area, and particularly the ones that are only about probably 5 or 6 metres away from us, are some of the oldest ones in the park. Obviously, they haven't been burnt or chopped down over the last couple of 100 years.
Yeah, and they're quite stunning. Even the skeletons of the trees make quite a stunning landscape, but the ones that are still alive are multi-trunked and beautiful, smooth colouring on the trunk. So yeah, it's something to enjoy.
As was the start of yesterday, the wildflowers are quite good. Sometimes you've got to look. It's not as if the whole hill is carpeted, but walking along the road, and this road is pretty much, or this walk is pretty much on management trail. You're getting,
I love that.
You're getting a lot of wildflowers along the edge of the road, and even when you sort of walk into the various huts, you're picking up different types of wildflowers in different areas. So it's quite attractive. Now, this hut is one of the bigger huts. It's almost a house more than anything else. There's a kitchen area. There's a little wet room or mud room, I suppose, when you enter. And then there's a couple of bunk areas, or it looks like about 3 almost joined bunk areas. And then there's an area which is closed at the back for whatever reason, and it's got a padlock on the door at this end. Same as the toilet. It looks like there's a second toilet here, but it's locked, so they obviously rotate them through depending on how heavily the use is. Now the sun is coming up now. It's
been coming up for a little while. It's just hitting the campsite now.
Yeah, I mean, this hut is obviously being placed in a particular area to shelter it from the wind, and it is that it's tucked in this almost at the end of the valley, and looking away from the hut, there's this long open valley in the front of it, but where it's sort of tucked in, there's a stream which you may not be able to hear at the back of us. Lots of little trees, and it really is quite protected. So they've obviously done that for a reason, but it is a very large hut, and I'll be interesting to have a look at a bit of history of this hut when I go back to Canberra and get access to a computer to see whether this was actually a homestead rather than a hut, because that's what it looks like. Okay, time to head back to the start of the trail. Talk to you later. It's 10 to 8. We've been going for roughly around about just over half hour, and we've stopped just to do a recording at Schlink's Pass.
It's only one, it's not several. or a possessive. You'll get it right by the end of the day.
And the sign is pretty worn, but it's in feet and in metres as well. So it's actually 1,804 metres just as we go down. So I'll check later on today, but once I get home. But I think this is probably the highest point of the whole trip. 1,800 metres is getting up there. It's, there's not too much more distance to go to Kosciuszko. Much different sort of day today. The sun has well and truly come out. We're just about to go down into the next valley, and while the valley we are in with the hut was fairly clear, this next valley has got fog and cloud in it.
I think it's mostly fog. I think it'll burn off.
Yeah, I think so too. But it's just interesting. You go from one valley to the next and it's just totally different. No wind today so far, which is quite nice. That always makes a big difference. A lot of the issue with the alpine areas, particularly when you're up on the really exposed summits right up high, is you get impacted by the wind no matter what you do. But here, walking through these valleys, the wind can be annoying when it goes all day, but so far so good today as far as it's not impacting on us yet. The pass where we're on at the moment, lots of white daisies in flower, so almost covering this whole area. And it's basically a saddle, so again that's the Schlink Pass.
Yeah, look, I think we're in for a really nice day. It is quite different as you go from one valley to the next, and there's a temptation to stop and put on clothes or take off clothes, but it's not too far, so you just keep going.
Okay, we'll head off again. It's just on 9:30. We've been stopping for about 10 or 15 minutes, just having a morning tea break. Usually we have a break after around about 2 hours, and that's pretty much spot on. One of the problems on this sort of walk is lots of grass, not many logs or rocks in the right spot to sort of sit and have a tea break. So we're sitting on a causeway right on the edge of a creek. So I'm sure you can probably hear the water in the background. Moving reasonably quickly this morning, we've covered probably around about 7.6 kilometres. So we've got 11 kilometres as our total distance, so we've got under 4 kilometres left to go. And we've got the last hill to go as well, which is not steep. And then we're pretty much flat and then downhill, down that zigzagging roadway that came up from Guthaga up to the top of the hill. Clouds sort of moved in where we are at the moment, or the mist. So we had sunny area to start with, and now we're sort of pretty much overcast. but that's not too bad. It sort of kept the heat down a bit, and it's not particularly hot anyway, so it's quite pleasant walking temperature.
Yeah, it's quite nice this morning. We've seen a few cyclists, we've seen a few walkers already heading out. So, it looks like it's going to be another busy day like yesterday. There were quite a few cyclists on this road going and coming when we were heading out to Schlink Hut.
Okay, well, time to move on again, and the next time you hear from us should be at the car park at Guthaga Power Station. Talk to you later. It's 10:20 on day 2, which is the 29th of December 2020. We've just finished our walk to Schlink Hut. Been here about 10 minutes or so just threw the packs in the car and had a toilet break, just doing the last recording before we head off home. The walk from where we stopped for morning tea, we had an uphill section, not a steep one, and then pretty much it was downhill all the way down to the car park, down to Guthaga Power Station. I must admit, overall, I think for me this walk, I would have liked to have had some of it on track rather than on management road. I mean, the huts were really nice, but I think it would have been nice, as I said, just to go bush every so often.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not a fan of walking on management road, and I'm certainly not a fan of walking on management road uphill. But yeah, a few more tracks, and I probably get why that's not the case. But the other thing is it's really accessible for both walkers as well as mountain bike riders, and it can get quite busy. So the car park here now is just overflowing.
There's actually 23 cars here, and it's actually designed for 20 cars. So there's 3 cars that have parked on the grass, and there's a lot more cars up on the entry roadway as you come in. So it's busier today. And I do recognise a couple of cars from people that were here yesterday that are still out on track walking.
Yeah, so in terms of, I guess, would we do it again? Probably not. I'm not sure that I would. That'd have to be something quite special for me. I'm also not a fan of, camping, pitching the tent where everybody else has pitched their tent. And again, I understand why that's the case, to contain the impact. But yeah, it's, the campsite last night I think was pretty busy, and there weren't that many level sites available. We didn't talk about this morning, but we just slowly drifted to the bottom end of the tent, didn't we, overnight?
Yeah, we did. All right, that's it for the Schlink track walk.
Okay, so that was our 2-day trip on the Schlink Hut walking trail in Kosciuszko National Park. And you'll have to forgive some of the early recordings. It was a bit windy, particularly that first day and the first part of the day.
I thought you were going to say you have to forgive your pronunciation of Schlink Hut, because it was pretty variable, Tim.
It is, and I've actually got some bloopers at the end of this podcast episode. I just could not get it right, so it's just one of those pronunciations. Okay, so we're just going to go through and just talk a bit about the track overall. And firstly, as I said at the start of this podcast, it's worthwhile having a look at the written write-up, which has all the details and the logistical side of things associated with it. But this is a 23.1 kilometre walk for us, which is slightly longer than what's listed in the New South Wales Parks website. And I think that is because we did the visits into the 2 designated huts as well as the 3rd informal hut as well. So it would be slightly shorter if you skipped the huts and just walked on the road to Schlink Hut. The trail tread, as we mentioned, really this walk, and it's not unsurprising in a lot of the areas in Kosciuszko National Park and the Alpine National Park areas where there's a lot of walking on management road. And in fact, this walk, regardless of where you go to, the entire walk is on management road. And there's some pluses and minuses for that. The pluses is it's generally pretty easy to maintain where you're going. The only confusing point, if you like, was you get up the top of the very steep hill at the start of the walk and you're presented with a Y branch in the road, and there's a couple of very poor metal signs that sort of try and give you a bit of a weak indication where you should go. And that's in fact what you're doing. You're veering to the right, but otherwise it's pretty easy, and you just follow the management road, and you can't get lost.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to navigate. That first part uphill on the zigzag, I found quite tough. It was quite. It was actually a little bit sheltered from the wind, so it was quite warm. If it was much higher temperature, that would have been, pretty roasty on the way up. But yeah, and funny enough, it did seem. It's always the case. At the time, it seems harder and longer, and then you look back and you think, oh, probably shouldn't have complained so much on the way up that hill.
Yeah, and I think certainly for. If you're new to hiking and you think, oh God, this whole trip's going to be like this, it's really those first 2.5 kilometres, and then from there it's undulating rather than sort of straight up like that first section is. The comment I'd probably make on this walk, and one of the reasons we've gone through and reviewed this, is it is very much a choose your own adventure sort of walk. There are 3 huts, and you could choose to do the horse camp hut return, which is just under 8 kilometres. You could choose to do the Whites River Hut, and it is Whites with an S, Whites River Hut as a standalone walk and return, and that's just on about 17 kilometres. Or you can do the full Schlink Hut return walk, which is 23.1 kilometres. So it depends on how fit you are, how experienced you are, how long a walk you want.
And how fast you want to move. I mean, as we said, that, we did take a lot of photos along the way, and, we were looking at all of the beautiful wildflowers that were just quite stunning. It depends on whether you're a racer or whether or not you're a stroller, I guess.
So, you could actually, if you wanted to, do this walk in one day. If you can walk an average walk around about 4 kilometres an hour. And for me, when I'm doing long distance hiking, I work on the basis that I'm doing 3.75 kilometres per hour. And that's based on a number of years of going through and measuring this sort of thing. But for me, that would mean that basically you're looking roughly around about a 6-hour return walk. But it is a long walk. So if you're not into doing those sort of distances, or you don't have the fitness, you can choose to do one of the shorter options. You could choose to make this a 3-night walk,
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is, I think, it also depends on whether or not you're staying locally or whether you're going to drive somewhere at the end of the day. So, to an overnight and 2 slightly shorter days, and then head off to wherever it is that you need to go is always much better than a long day of hiking and then getting in the car tired and driving somewhere for a few hours. So, it just depends on all sorts of different things that are part of how you want to do it and how you want to do your hiking.
Now, in relation to the huts, there are a total of 4 huts on this track, 3 that are officially on the track itself, and an additional one which we'll talk about in a moment. So the Horse Camp Hut, which was built roughly in 1950 for the Snowy Mountains Authority, and that's, if you do that as a standalone hike, it's just an 8 kilometres return, or, it's 4 kilometres after the start of the walk. And that was built to, it got its name because that's where they used to, the paddock next door was where they used to store their horses overnight. So it was a working hut for the Snowy Mountains Authority. What have we got? 70 years ago. So it was certainly it's not an ancient hut, but it's an old hut. We mentioned that a couple of things about the huts, and it is consistent with all these huts. There was a water tank behind the hut, and it was red, and it has "do not drink," and it also has fire stamped on it. So if you lose control of something, you have a fire and it gets out of control, there's a water source at immediately the back of the hut. And certainly you could drink from it, but if you were going to be doing that, I would be inclined to filter it. And the thing about these walks, or this walk in particular, is the New South Wales Park Service say water is limited, you need to bring your own water. There is that many streams, and these are permanent streams all the way along this track. You can quite comfortably carry whatever you need for the day and top up as you go. But again, I would suggest filtering.
The other thing is about the streams is, there had been a lot of rain, and so they were definitely flowing. And yes, they are permanent. But in times of low water, you probably have to look a little bit harder. I think go a little bit longer, look a bit harder.
The other thing with these three huts that they had in common was the toilet with a split door. Now, there's a couple of reasons why this is the case. First and foremost, it's to cater for the winter season, and a lot of people do cross-country skiing or snowshoeing in this area. And I've seen a photo of Schlink hut in a heavy snowfall in wintertime when there's been sort of 2.5 to 3 metres of snow around the hut itself. So by having a split opening door, providing that the toilet's not totally buried under snow, it means you can actually just open the top half and access it. Be a bit of creative climbing to get in. The other thing it also does as well is, it means you can have the bottom half closed, the top half open, have a bit of a view while you're doing your business.
Yeah, some have been sealed, so, they don't work, if you like. So, it's still one full door. But, yeah, that particular one at the first hut, it did appear as if it was still operational.
The other thing with Horse Camp Hut as well, it was probably the best maintained out of the three huts. It was almost, in some respects, it was almost like it was a mown grass area. There was a lot of flat area around the hut, and in fact, it was probably the best of the three huts in relation to if you wanted a flat space to put your tent.
Yeah.
Horse Camp Hut was your best option. Inside, the hut was really attractive as well. For a hut of its age. And the huts really are meant as emergency huts. They're not designed to be used and leave your tent at home. They're designed to be used in emergencies. But people do go through and camp in them. And certainly in wintertime, if the snow is really bad, it may be that's where you are going to have to stay. It's always best to take your own tent rather than assuming you can go through and use the huts. One thing I would say with the huts as well is it doesn't matter which state you're in. Normally, the park services don't like you camping hard up against the huts themselves, but sometimes there is no option. If the choice is to go into the middle of the bush and start chopping down shrubs and trees to form a flat campsite, you're better off camping closer to the hut where you can actually not destroy the environment to actually get a tent site. Moving on from Horse Camp Hut, again, back on Management Road, you've got not long after you leave the hut and you get back on the main trail, you're heading downhill, and the trail is pretty much undulating until the end point, but it's not steep.
You keep saying you're heading downhill when we haven't yet hit the peak, so, don't try and kid me. There were lots of big hills.
But it was downhill sections at least anyway. But the overall tone of the whole walk is heading up. So we headed up to what we thought was the second hut, which was White's River Hut, and we could see a hut on the left-hand side of the road. And in fact, all the huts are on the left-hand side of the road going out. And it was actually a very small hut down the bottom of the hill. It wasn't marked, and I didn't think it was the right one, but I thought just in case I'll go and have a look. So Jill stayed up the top on the main trail. I dropped my pack off and walked a couple of 100 metres down, And again, it was another Snowy Mountains Authority working hut. And this was locked, not for public use at all. And it really is a working hut that they use when they are doing work within the park. But it was a good little hut just to go through and have a look at. Back onto the main trail again. And again, we weren't too far after that short hut. We come to White's River Hut. Now, White's River Hut is probably the more basic of the three huts. It was actually built in 1934, 1935 as a stockman's hut. So it's the oldest of the three huts in this area on this trail. And it's, again, kitchen area and bedroom area, which tends to be pretty standard for most of these sort of huts, with a toilet and lots of flat areas to actually go through and put your tent up. So this is another good option. One thing I would say about this hut is there were very few people camping there overnight. I think on the way back in the morning, we passed it fairly early in the morning and there was only 2 tents. So this, in some respects, is not a bad place to stop because you are actually not having to beat the crowds, if you like, to find a good spot. And there are plenty of good options.
Yeah, there are fewer people. You get pretty close to Schlink Hut and people, I guess, figure you'll continue on. So there were few people likely to pitch a tent there, but there were also some flatter spots as well.
One thing that was interesting was that the metal bridge that crossed the creek/river pretty much was in a state of collapse. So it was some of the supports underneath had pretty much given way. So the metal mesh was almost like a U shape. And I can imagine in periods of heavy rain or early spring when all the snow's melting, you might get wet feet getting there. The other thing as well is if you're going there in wintertime when there is heavy snow, it would be so easy to lose where the metal mesh is to get across. And as I said, people do these tracks in snowshoes and in skis in wintertime, but for those sort of people, they're the ones that have experience in snow conditions in remote areas. From there, back onto the main trail again, and we headed towards Schlink Hut. And before we got there, we got to Schlink Pass, and the sign was that old. It had the height in feet as well as meters, and it was pretty hard to read because it had been there for so many years. Schlink Pass is probably one of the few spots on the entire trail where you can be guaranteed of getting a phone signal. So if you desperately need to make a phone call or check your emails, do it at the Schlink Pass. And Schlink Pass was around about 1.5 kilometres from White's River Hut, and then it's another 1.5 kilometres to a Schlink Hut itself. We headed on to Schlink Hut, and we got there. I'm trying to think what time we got there, around about just before 4 o'clock, I think. And there were a lot of people there. The signs at the trailhead said this area of the park. Now, I don't know quite how they work out what this area of the park means. Was allowed to have 300 people. But we got there and there was probably 10 tents. Not all of them had 2 people in them, so there probably would have been about 15 people. And the ground around this hut is really sloping. So there were a lot of people, and if you have a look at some of the images in the write-up, that are camped hard up against the hut because that's the only flat areas that you'll find.
Yeah, and there isn't a lot of space dedicated for camping either, so you are quite close to the hut. The other option is to go close to the toilet, which is not such a great option. So, but even then, it's pretty hard to find a flat piece.
So Schlink Hut itself goes by the name of the Schlink Hilton. This was another hut that was built in 1960-61, and it was built for the Snowy Mountains Authority, and it was designed to be used by workers when they were putting the high voltage power lines through the park area. So it's surprisingly large. I thought this must have been a real homestead because it was of the size of it. But it's the newer of the three huts along this trail. And as I said, I've seen photos of this in wintertime where there's been 2 to 3 meters of snow surrounding the hut. So it's the sort of thing you don't want to wander out there unless you know what you're doing in the middle of winter. The nighttime temperature, we expected it to be, or the forecast was 3 degrees. When we went to bed and got up the next morning, the temperature, we had ice on the packs, which we'd left outside the tent.
Yeah, and quite a bit actually, not just a tiny bit here and there. It was, and also ice on the fly of the tent as well. So there was a lot of moisture the night before with the mist that rolled in. So it was a bit moist. So that was enough to turn the moisture into ice.
And this is the thing that if you're not used to camping in the Australian alpine areas, it's not unusual to have daytime temperatures approaching 30-odd degrees and then nighttime temperatures having icy conditions or even light snowfalls. And I've seen in other areas of the park and some of the social media posts in some of the groups that I follow in some of the Victorian parks, they had snow around about that time. And certainly in the northern part of Kosciuszko, there was also snow a few days before the trip that we did. So,
And the day did warm up quite quickly though. I mean, it wasn't super cold in the morning when we got up, and it didn't stay cold for a long time.
No, but you do need to cater for those conditions. You can't sort of think, well, it's the middle of summer, I can get away with a really lightweight sleeping bag and not much clothing. You really do need to cater for temperatures around 0 degrees, even in the middle of summer. So we left on the second day. We had a wander around. We talked to a couple of the people there, and some people were going further into the park. Some were actually going cross country over towards Mount Twynham and Mount Kosciuszko, and there's quite a lot in this area. There are other huts, but certainly this is the main trail from the Guthaga Power Station. If you feel like going off trail and you're good with your map and your compass work, there's certainly plenty of options in this area of the park. So we got up fairly early. We had breakfast. We chatted to a couple of people. We went and had a look inside the hut and then headed back to the car park at Guthaga. Took us probably around about 3.5 hours, I think, to return. And again, we stopped for morning tea. We had a pretty cruisy sort of walk, so it wasn't certainly that difficult to walk. And we didn't drop into the other hut, so it was a bit shorter in distance to sort of get us back there. One thing I forgot to mention at the start of this last section was this is a shared trail, so there was a lot of mountain bikers, which Jill did mention. So you do need to be paying attention because they seem to come through in groups. And sometimes if they're coming downhill, they're moving pretty quickly and don't have the ability to stop really quickly if you leap out of them when they don't know you're there.
And interestingly, a number of them had motors, so that's my kind of mountain biking. I did wonder how they were going to get up that big hill, but a number of them had motors and they just click into power mode and keep going, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I'm not used to seeing electric mountain bikes, but there's certainly a thing these days. So overall, as I said, one of the reasons we decided to do a podcast on this walk is because it's a choose your own adventure. If you're into doing longer distances and want to go off trail, there are certainly plenty of options to do that. If you're new to hiking and camping and want something that's a bit further away from the city than a lot of hiking sites are, but it's still relatively easy to navigate, this is a really good option, and it gives you the choice to decide how long or how short you want to make this walk. By rights, you can camp away from the huts, but the huts just provide that bit of extra wind shelter and the toilet facilities. Speaking of toilet facilities, there is no toilet paper in the toilets, so bring your own. And that's, I think, whether they actually stock them up, I don't know. But given the sheer number of people that are in the parks, it wouldn't last very long. So, definitely bring your own toilet paper.
Yeah, I think, and you never know how many people are going to be passing through and, what the usage is like. And it is remote, so you can't expect the rangers to be, constantly topping up the toilet paper. So be a bit more self-sufficient in that regard.
Okay, so that's all for this episode. We hope it's been of use and that it's provided you information if you're in the northern end of Kosciuszko National Park and are looking at a decent day walk or a relatively easy overnight or multiple overnight walk. This is certainly a good option. That's all for me. Bye for now.
And bye from me.
Now, in today's episode 174, we are taking you through our on-trail episode of the Schlink Hut walking track in Hos. In today's episode 174, we are taking you through our on-trail episode of the